Hello and welcome to Sharing a Diagnosis. My name is Natalie. Today we're going to cover the who, what, where, when, and whys of sharing a diagnosis. And this could be sharing a diagnosis with your loved one, with your family, with your child's school, neighbors, community. We're going to look at the reasons why we share a diagnosis and when we might share a diagnosis, how to go about doing that, who are we going to be sharing this information with, and then we're going to end our session today to covering a little bit about managing reactions. So just quickly, the objectives for today. The first one is share and connect with other parents and caregivers. And I just want to remind you all that this is pre-recorded, but we do offer this virtually where other families can come together virtually. And then obviously, I hope sooner than later that we can offer this in person as well. It's a really wonderful opportunity for parents and caregivers and family members to come together and connect and share their experiences. So we're going to just move through learning about the benefits and the challenges of sharing a diagnosis, and we're going to consider the best time and environment for sharing. We're going to look at and explore the strengths and the gifts of your child, and then we're going to take a look at the planning and the considerations around what language and words you want to use if you choose to share a diagnosis. We'll talk about some resources, what approach you might take, and also looking at what would be best for your child.
We're so pleased to offer you this free wellness services event, and we really welcome your feedback. Following the workshop today, if you could kindly take a moment to complete a brief survey, taking a picture of the QR code that you see here on your screen from your mobile device, or by clicking on the link in the description below.
So we're going to start off with to share or not to share. And to begin, I just really want to remind everybody that this is a very personal decision, and this is going to look differently for everyone. The process is a journey, and it starts with yourself as the parent, the caregiver, the family member. And I just want to remind people that there is no right age and that every situation is very, very unique. And you want to look at if your child is showing some readiness, and maybe are they asking questions? You want to be sure that they're at a developmental stage as well as age, right? And to realize that those are not always the same thing. If we're looking at a child with extra needs, special needs, autism spectrum disorder, even FASD, Down syndrome, we want to be sure that we are speaking a language and sharing information that our child is going to understand. And a reminder to consult with your doctor or school or specialists as you prepare and you go along this journey. Be sure you're getting all of the proper information from the proper people at the right time, and make sure that you have a plan. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about here. So we're going to start with parent-caregiver considerations. And just to start off by reminding parents that are here watching this session today that you yourself need time to process and understand the diagnosis yourself. It's a lot of information. There are lots of feelings around the journey and the process and then actually receiving a diagnosis. And so you really want to start with, before you're sharing it with anybody else, if you're feeling hesitation, is that you're taking the time for yourself to maybe come to terms with the information, really understand what the diagnosis means. And then you want to talk about your parenting style and sharing this information as two parents. And before you start to share the information and seek maybe supports and services, maybe start telling your extended family or your child's daycare or school, neighbors, you want to be on the same page. So both parents should really have a plan and a comfort level of how they're going to go about sharing this diagnosis. And really be sure that you get the support and information that you need first for yourself. And sometimes it's about finding the right words, the right language, and being prepared for people's questions, really being confident in how you want to share the information, when you want to share the information, so on and so forth. And we're going to learn a little bit about how we can get more prepared as we go through the session today. We're going to also look at your child's readiness. So as I had said in the beginning, there's no right age. So maybe you're attending this session today and you're looking at sharing a diagnosis with an individual that's 20. Maybe you're looking at starting to explain some things to your child who has received a new diagnosis of autism, who's maybe 6. And usually it starts with the child themselves asking questions. You know, why don't I have any friends? Or why don't I get invited to places? Or why is it difficult for me to play sports? Why do I feel different? Is there something wrong with me? Now, these are just examples. But sometimes the first indication is that they're struggling socially or they're feeling different amongst their peers. Sometimes they start to realize that they're having difficulty in school and that they're not quite fitting in with the rest of the kids. Sometimes we have to sit down and explain the diagnosis or the child's situation or needs because there's safety issues. Maybe they're wandering in the community. Maybe they're telling strangers their personal information. You know, these are the types of things that you might want to, take into consideration when you're looking at whether or not your child is ready to learn about their needs, their diagnosis. The other really important piece here is to think about whether or not your child is showing signs of mental health issues, maybe depression or anxiety around that feeling different or not fitting in, or really super isolated, spending too much time on their own. So we're looking at this sort of isolation mood, mental health piece as well, which is obviously extremely, extremely important, particularly on top of just being so isolated over the last few years through COVID. So I thought it would be important for us to talk a little bit about the environment and where we share the information and what that might look like. And so obviously we're going to try and start with a positive environment that's comfortable and safe. You know, for me, that probably looks like being at home. And you want to start off with minimal information. You know, don't inundate the child or overwhelm the individual or child, and really just start off with a little bit of the information and maybe step back and see how that information is being received by your child or your loved one. It's really important to make sure that you have enough time, that this is somewhat prepared, so that there's time for the individual to process the information themselves, and they may want to ask questions. There might be questions, there might be easy questions, there might be tricky questions, but you really want to make sure that you take that moment and say, do you have any questions? And make sure that they're going off with that information in a positive way and a solid understanding of what you have shared with them. You may want to consider visuals or books. There's some really great books out there right now on sharing a diagnosis or, having autism. There's a list of books that I'll share with you at the end, but I mean, if you were even just to Google it, you'll see that there's all sorts of stuff, lots and lots of support around visuals and books. I think it's important that you plan to revisit the conversation after a few days or a little bit of time, and check in and see how things are going. You may want to write down examples or questions that they've asked in the past to sort of start off the conversation. So remember the time that you asked Mommy about ... Well, I wanted to tell you, that's difficult for you because, and then you can sort of start the conversation like that. It's always nice to start off with something that they've asked or they've shared as a way to start the conversation. You want to consider sharing during an appointment with a specialist or doctor. That might be something that you're more comfortable with. There's a lot of emotion around sharing a diagnosis. You don't know which way it's going to go. You don't know whether the child's going to become scared or upset. You don't know whether your child will just sort of blow it off like, yeah, I know, whatever, who cares? You don't know if the person's going to become angry, and you don't know how you're going to react. Perhaps saying these words out loud is going to sort of trigger some kind of emotion for yourself as well. And so, just really know that there are supports there for you. There's service coordinators here at Surrey Place. There's therapists, professionals, clinicians, maybe your own family doctor, pediatrician. And as you're sharing the information, it's always good to highlight the strengths, the gifts, and the positive examples. And you're going to see as we go through this workshop together, that really is my hit-home message to everybody. That although our children may come with a diagnosis and might come with some needs and some barriers and some difficulties in their development and in their lives, they all come with special gifts. They all come with things that are a strength for them. And I think that it's really important that we build on that, not only while we're sharing a diagnosis, but throughout their lives. So, benefits of sharing. I guess I can say that I'm coming definitely from a place of feeling positive about sharing a diagnosis. I've worked with families for about 20 years, supporting children and adults with all types of disabilities. And I've seen a lot of positivity around sharing a diagnosis and being honest about what's happening. I also have a sibling, an older sibling, who has a diagnosis as well as some extreme mental health issues. And, finally, after so many years, being able to really help him understand what was happening was a game changer for him. And he really started to put together some of the reasons why he was different, or why he had struggled so long. And this conversation with he and I happened when he was in his 40s. But I do see how things opened up for him, and things made more sense, and things started to fall into place. He was more open to receiving support. And he didn't have to feel embarrassed or ashamed about, being scared to go on the bus some days, or whatever that looked like on days that he was having difficulty. So I do come from a place of feeling that sharing a diagnosis is positive, can be positive. It removes the fears about being ill or being sick with something, and that's the example I just gave you of my own personal experience. It can avoid confusion around assessments and appointments. So you have to think that for the most part, many of our kids go to all these additional appointments and doctor's appointments, and they're asked all these questions, and they're poked and prodded. And for the most part, they don't even know why they're there or what the purpose of it is. And then maybe they're feeling like something worse is happening, or perhaps that there's something wrong or that they're sick, and so it just avoids the confusion. And then it's also an opportunity to avoid something negative happening. Maybe somebody calling them out or pointing out their shortcomings before you have the opportunity to explain to them why they may have difficulty in certain areas of their life. So this is a proactive approach to being able to maybe give your child the tools or the words that they need around their needs, to be able to advocate for themselves, to understand what's happening in their days with their peers or how they might be feeling. And this kind of links into the next point where you're avoiding accidental disclosure through school or family or community. And I have seen this happen. It can be really quite damaging and heartbreaking and overwhelming when a child hears it from somebody else in another environment other than at home with a safe person like yourself in a safe environment. So that's just something to think about, that if a child is really showing some strong signs of, let's say, autism, and somebody else, says something to them in a negative or derogatory way about having autism or being autistic, you kind of want to obviously avoid anything like that happening if you can. I'd already mentioned it, but the self-advocacy piece, the earlier the better, to be able to give an individual the words and the information they need to understand themselves so that they can navigate their day and their life, and having the words to be able to ask for what they need if they get stuck. Having the opportunity to maybe do things a little bit differently in different environments like school or camp or daycare, and being able to ask for those things so that they can feel safe or less anxious, more included. Secrets can end badly, right? So if we're holding on to something as a secret, and then it comes out, there could be more harm in holding on to that information, keeping it a secret, than there is in sharing. So it's just something to consider. All of this information that I'm sharing with you today are just things to consider about your own personal situation. Often when we share with our children around their diagnosis or their needs, it helps them understand their behaviors. It helps them understand maybe why they feel a certain way, why they do certain things. And I think that in some situations, in many situations, having the information may reduce the fear, which then may reduce the difficult behaviors or the lashing out or the resisting. If they have the information and understand a little bit about why things might be difficult for them, why they hate, changing from summer clothes to winter clothes, why transitioning into different rooms or different activities really overwhelms them. And so their first reaction is to resist or to lash out. But if they understood that it was because of their diagnosis and some things were put into place, these are going to give an individual the skills they need and the words they might need to be able to join in and enjoy life in a much more peaceful way. It also will maybe help them not feel so alone or different or isolated. I mean, some of our kids, particularly those that are on the spectrum that have ASD, they don't mind being on their own. For example, I really worried about my brother being on his own. He lives on his own. And, when COVID was really hitting us hard, I was so worried about him spending so much time on his own. And, and in his own words, he's like, I like being on my own. So, sometimes the isolation or being different bothers us more or worries us more than them. But I do think that there comes to be a time where there's some awareness around being different and being left out and being isolated. So again, just something to consider. It looks different for everybody. But anything we can do to have our children and our families and our loved ones feeling a sense of belonging and not feeling isolated or left out because of a diagnosis or being different, I think it's good for all of the whole entire family, including the individual that has special needs, to feel a sense of belonging, start to have their own identity. And when we're being included, when we have words, when we have information, when we have knowledge, then we start seeing this blooming self-esteem starting to happen, which as a parent, we all love to see. When we do this workshop together in person, I love to take some time for us all just to pause and think about some of the things that our loved one, our child, the person we're thinking about today, our family member, let's think about the strengths and the gifts associated with your child's diagnosis. Maybe write those down. Really hone in on those things. We can spend so much time thinking about the negative things, the difficult things. But when we take some time and really start to think about the things that we enjoy about our kids and our siblings and our friends and our loved ones that might have a diagnosis, I think that we'll find that there's some pretty awesome stuff that's happening. So what we want to do is we want to use examples of some of these gifts and some of these strengths. And so maybe when we're sharing the diagnosis and we're looking to find the right words, we want to use some of these strengths as examples, right? So, you always get the highest mark in math. This is also part of your diagnosis. That this is your gift, this is your strength, this is what you're good at. It's not always bad stuff. You know how much you love planes, you know how you like trains. This is a common trait of individuals with ASD. Your memory and ability to remember facts and understand facts about history. This is your gift. This is part of your autism. This is just an example that I'm giving you. But then there's also, remember yesterday in the park and how you found it hard to join in with the other kids? Well, that's because you have autism and sometimes it's difficult for you. So let's think of ways or things that we can say when we get to the park that allows us to join in more smoothly, more naturally with the other kids. Would you like that? Just an example. And then using some examples, if you can, it's also, it's just going to really depend on age and the level of understanding and all of those things. But you could use other examples like, athletes need extra practice to get better. So, there's nothing wrong with you because you have to practice things and do things over and over again. This is how we learn. Professional athletes learn this way as well. If your child is one of those children that just really needs quiet time to be able to focus, or needs reminders, needs some space, you can maybe point out that you yourself learn that way or need to concentrate in that kind of environment as well, right? So just these examples that will help your child understand all sides of themselves, that it's not just bad stuff, that there's these strengths, there's also these needs, and trying to find a way to help them understand the best way to navigate both of those things. We can also have this extreme interest in planes, but we can't talk about planes all the time, all day long, right? So it's just navigating those conversations. And then also just pointing out that it's not just them, that there's many other children in their school, in their community, in their classroom that also needs extra help, so that they just don't feel like that they're alone. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about exploring and managing the reaction. So if we've chosen to share a diagnosis and some information around a diagnosis with our child, we want to think about being sure that we're making some nice eye contact if it's available, and just really acknowledging feelings that come up, right? It might come as a shock. They might get silly about it, but you just kind of want to be prepared around how to support the feelings and the emotions that come up. And that it's okay that we can acknowledge that this is big news, right? This is a big thing that's happening. And we need to be sure that we're allowing space and time for the child to express their feelings around it. And that, you know, if it all starts to kind of go in a negative way, again, you really want to be sure that you are redirecting back to the strengths, redirecting back to the positivity. And so that's why having a little bit of a plan and having a safe environment is so important when we are looking at sharing a diagnosis with our children. We also want to be sure that we're looking for maybe a low mood or a negative reaction or additional anxiety or isolation after we have shared a diagnosis, because this too can happen, right? So we want to make sure that we're checking in, we're really asking questions, we share the information and the check-in next day, maybe then again the following week, and then maybe just having this something that is just something that's in conversation, that doesn't feel so daunting. And keeping an open and honest conversation going, I think, is just a really good reminder. So we're going to talk a little bit about the different environments. School and community is obviously a big piece, because our children spend a significant amount of time in these environments. And so you want to start talking and thinking about when to share with school, camp, aftercare, the teachers, and also the support staff. Do you even want to share with school? I would say yes, it's extremely important to share with these people. It's extremely important to be able to share the assessment and the diagnosis to be sure that your child is getting as much support as possible at school. And we know that school can be a very, very challenging environment for our kiddos. And so I am a strong believer, and it's in my opinion, that sharing with school is very, very important. We want to be sure that if we are enrolling our child in a summer camp, for instance, that people in direct contact and care with our child know that sometimes they could still have accidents if they're in a new environment. So, you know, through the day, can you please make sure that there's lots of reminders to use the washroom? Can you please make sure that if you're out in the community that you keep, a hand on my son at all times, hold his hand, because if he sees something of interest, he may bolt into the road. I mean, this is just safety, well-being, when we're talking about camp or after school care or daycare. But I feel like the more information we can share with school and community, the better. And again, that is my opinion. That is what I've seen in my professional career, working with families and children. Other things are that once you share with school, there's accommodations that are available for your child, and the child would also get an IEP, so an individualized education plan, meaning they would look at the assessment of your child and then also look at what things need to happen in the school environment to be sure that your child can learn best. School, daycare, camp, aftercare will have a better understanding of behaviors. If they start seeing things and they don't understand why it's happening, and they have tried to address it a few times with your child, maybe verbally, and your child's nonverbal, then maybe there's a nice conversation that happens to be able to understand how to accommodate so that the behavior can be looked at in a more positive way. It also builds a little bit of support around your child when people in school, classrooms, and other environments understand that there's a diagnosis so that we can avoid bullying, isolation, being left out from activities with peers. And then, in good schools and in good classrooms, there's this circle of support that starts to happen around your child. And then, of course, there's more inclusion and there's more peer interaction and support. Sharing with peers and friends. I know that this can sometimes be a little overwhelming. It can sometimes be a little tricky, but I thought it would be important that we also just talk about some of the considerations around sharing with peers and friends as well. And there is the thought that this really allows for less bullying and overall negative experiences. Children are much more intuitive than we give them credit for, right? So children often know that something might be different, or they're having a hard time with joint attention with somebody they really want to play with, and it might feel like that child is not interested. But maybe if they understood the needs or the diagnosis of the child, it would allow for more positive interactions. Opportunities to avoid future discrimination, and also less conflict, less overall conflict. It also allows for questions. Children are very inquisitive. They want to know. And for the most part, children are not mean, right? Like they want to help. They want to be inclusive. They want to understand. And I think that it's important that we are sharing with all children around all the differences that an individual might come with, not just a diagnosis. It can be anything. But I think that if a child asks a question, and it's an appropriate question, it would be so good if we could give them an appropriate, honest answer. It gives perhaps the opportunity for you to meet other caregivers, other parents who might be experiencing some of the same things so that you can get support, or maybe you can be a support to somebody else. And I also think that when we're sharing with our friends and peers and our community, it just makes for a safer environment. And so it leads us to considerations with family. And this is a big one. I know that in my working with families over the years, I have sat down and helped many of my families navigate this piece. It brings up a lot of emotion. We were, I'm in Toronto, Canada, super multicultural, and for some of our families, they just don't understand. And when we don't understand, we get scared. We don't understand, we get angry. So there's a lot of these pieces that we need to consider. So we receive a diagnosis. Myself and my partner talk about it. We share with school, and extended family, grandparents, for example, are not having it. They're not seeing it. They're in denial. It happens all the time. So take your time. Take your time, really use your gut instinct. It's a lot. It's a lot to share. There's a lot of emotion around it. And so I just wanted to take a moment to really acknowledge that this piece can sometimes be tricky. My grandfather was in his 90s before he fully understood my brother's diagnosis. He's still alive. He's 95. He's now totally has a different relationship with my brother, but for the longest time he just didn't have a relationship with him because he didn't understand him. And so that's just my personal experience. And my grandfather's side is European and sort of hard outlook on things and life, very black and white about many things in life. And so it was very hard for him to understand, and it took us a very long time, but he's got it now. So just wanted to share my personal experience there. As the parent or the caregiver or the family member, you want to set the tone for how you want to share the information. If you can involve the child, the family member as well, So we're going to go and tell Grandpa about your diagnosis and why sometimes things are difficult when we come together as a family. So, what do you want to say? How do you want to explain it? If you have the opportunity to do it together, that is a dream come true. But the reality is most of us do not, and it doesn't happen like it does in a movie. So you have to set the tone and be prepared. I think that it's important that everybody's sort of living in the nuclear family. So, for instance, if I was sharing a diagnosis and I had a partner, I would want to make sure that we are seeing things eye to eye, and that we are using the same positive language when we are sharing the information or describing a diagnosis to family. And extended family might need more time, right? For instance, it took 60 years for my grandfather to understand. But that's okay. Everybody's going to process it their own way. But I think that having everybody on the same page and not having any secrets reduces everybody's stress, everybody's anxiety, and then there's a much more supportive environment. Having said that, I know that this is a tricky thing. This is probably one of the most difficult in my experience with families that I've worked with and for myself. So as I said before, everybody's journey looks different. Take your time, find your words, and use your gut instinct. Some closing thoughts. So we're getting to the end here, and I'm really hoping that, this discussion is helping you find your words, find your timing, find your way. Maybe it has just sort of sparked a different way of looking at things. Everybody is going to take away something different from this session today. And so I just want to end by saying every child and family is unique. And how great is that? How boring would our world be if we were all the same? Take some time to process the information and the diagnosis. Get all of the correct information that you can. Remember that Google is not always your best friend. Make sure you've got all of the correct information and that you remember that this is your journey, your child's journey, your family's journey, right? And it is a journey. It takes time. Has many ups and downs, and that's just life, right? That's real life. Have a plan and be prepared. It's not to say that sometimes just naturally conversations will come up with your child, but if you know that there's a lot of information around a diagnosis that you need to share, I personally would suggest that you have a plan and make sure you have all the things you need for that to be successful. Whether it's your questions written down or some of the words or phrases that you want to use. If your child is nonverbal but can understand, then maybe you want to look at social stories, pictures, books, movies, right? So it does take some thought. It does take some planning. We do want to think about the amount of time that it takes or that we're taking to make sure that we are sharing the information in the most appropriate way for the individual that you are sharing with. And we want to give the child the opportunity to ask questions if that's something that they're able to do. And also just really hold space for reactions and questions and feelings and expect the unexpected, right? Sometimes we work it all up in our mind that's just going to be so horrific. And then you're like, that wasn't so bad, right? Sometimes we all 80%, 90% of the things we worry about never even happen. Not to say that I want to make light about this discussion or this topic, but just have space for it all to sort of come together. And again, really, you don't have to do this alone. You don't. There are people, I hope there are people in your circle of care, in your community, that you could consider consulting with, and professionals that are working with your child or loved one. And again, focus on all of the positives that you can. It's very easy for us to really hone in and get really stuck on the horrible things that this is going to bring to our lives and to our child. Yes, there's going to be challenges. And yes, there's going to be tough days, extra tough days when you have a child with special needs. But please find a way, if you can, to focus on the positives for yourself, as well as when you're explaining the diagnosis of your child to somebody else, particularly the child.
Wellness Services at Surrey Place offers over 100 in-person and live virtual events each month. To register, please visit mysurreyplace.ca. View our calendar of events and go ahead and create an account for yourself so that you can register for the free events that are of interest for you. We also offer many additional recorded events and hundreds of resources that may be of interest to you. Recorded events and resources are also available to view for free at a time most convenient for you at surreyplace.ca/resources. We invite you to join the Family Connections group by visiting the Facebook group on your screen here. The link can also be found below in the description. We really hope that you enjoyed this free wellness event. Please take a moment to complete a brief survey by taking a picture of the QR code that you see here on your screen with your mobile device, or by clicking the link in the description below. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you found this session helpful. Please, if you'd like, you can join our virtual session as well. We generally hold them each month on our wellness event page. I wish you all the best in your journey. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a great day.